But I have the real pleasure today to introduce someone I'm very excited about hearing from, Vivian Lee. She has an MD, that's a Harvard-trained radiologist. She has a PhD, that's a biomedical engineering degree with a Rhodes Scholarship attached to it. An MBA from NYU, and she was valedictorian in that class. So if that's not enough alphabet for you, she's currently with an alphabet company. She is president of health platforms at Verily Life Sciences, one of the clients that we represent, so I'm excited to be able to introduce her to you. She has an incredible resume. First of all, she had a successful career in academic medicine, 20 years of NIH funding. She was elected to the National Academy of Medicine, highest awards for magnetic resonance in medicine. She had a successful career in healthcare as a healthcare executive as well. She was CEO of the University of Utah Health. She implemented a number of innovations in healthcare delivery, and that resulted in a number of accolades for the university and the healthcare system. But if you're not humbled enough by those accomplishments, she recently authored a book, and the book is about value-based healthcare. If you haven't read the book, you should download it on Audible and listen to it as you go home, or you buy the print copy, but that will not give you the instant gratification that Jason sort of warned you that I like. So, the book is entitled The Long Fix, Solving America's Healthcare Crisis with Strategies That Work for Everyone. Kind of a lofty goal, but it's a really well-written book, and I highly recommend it. I think I've done the best I can possibly do to present to you an excellent speaker that's coming up. So Dr. Lee, please join us. Thank you. We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. I can't see when I... And I know I'm not in full present mode, but that way I can still see some other boxes on my screen, which is actually helpful. So I know we're still connected. As Tina mentioned, that I did just recently write this book, The Long Fix, and it's really a synthesis of lessons from across the country, some of my own experiences, but also interviewing more than 100 leaders across the landscape of healthcare and asking them, what can we do to really fix our healthcare system? And by far and away, I feel this is one of the most pressing issues in our society, in our country. And this is the kind of reason why. I think many of you have seen these kind of data, but compared to other high-income nations in the country, the US is this outlier in both the x-axis and the y-axis on this screen. So you can see that on the x-axis, we spend a lot more money per person on healthcare than any other high-income country, 2.5, even 3 times as much as some. And then on the y-axis, you can see by this measure of outcomes, say life expectancy, how long the average baby is going to live who's born today, we are also falling significantly short. So the average baby born today will live 4, 5, or 6 years less than the average baby born in, say, Japan or Switzerland or Israel. And so why is this? This is such a perplexing paradox that we spend more money and get less. And I think it's also emblematic of just what a crisis we are in terms of the legacy that we are leaving to future generations, to our children and beyond. Are we going to leave them a health system that bodes a more promising, healthier future, and one that is not crippling our economy? I think the answer has to be yes. And so that's sort of what set me out on this journey. And my journey actually began in New York City, where I was the chief scientific officer at NYU, and they're responsible for the research enterprise of a really excellent academic medical system. I became very interested in this question of both how can we improve discovery and translate from bench to bedside, but then also how can we ensure that when we have figured out effective treatments like the blood pressure pill that actually works for people who have hypertension, how can we get more people to actually take those pills? Today about only half of all people with high blood pressure actually do take their blood pressure medications. And so it's that question of broader population health that drew me more into a leadership role at the University of Utah, leading the medical system there as the CEO and as the dean of the medical school. And there, the perspective broadened from not only running a health system, but also we set up a health insurance plan. We had a company called ARUP Labs. Many of you may know that, a kind of a boutique lab testing company, and began to really think about how these all needed to work together in that community to drive better outcomes. And I was there after the Affordable Care Act, so a lot of thinking about what the payment changes were going to be doing to us. After 6 years leading that system, I took a year sabbatical, wrote this book, and then I was about to go and lead another health system, go and take on another CEO role. Actually, I was quite excited about it. And then the folks at Alphabet came back to me and said, I'd already turned them down. I said, I'm not really a techie. I'm still clutching my BlackBerry, but they came back and they said, you want to fix healthcare. You've written this book about fixing healthcare. Just come and do what's in your book, because that's really our aspiration too. And the one thing we do know in the Alphabet landscape is how to scale solutions. And so that's what intrigued me. And so about 3.5 years ago, I joined Verily, which is Google's or Alphabet's healthcare life sciences company, as you know. And fundamentally, what I've been focusing on and the way in which I view the broader challenges of fixing healthcare are really about how we can lead change. And so that's actually what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, which is thinking about how can we influence all of the different constituents who really do need to change for us to have a better healthcare system. And I love this quote from Socrates: "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And I know so many of you in this audience are really all about building the new. So what I wanted to share in the next maybe 15 or 20 minutes is some high-level thoughts about the implications of change for patients, clinicians, and payers. And to give you the landscape or the vantage or the perspective from the technology company that I'm working at and as a former CEO of a health system. So let me start there, since that is closest to my background, is just to share a few reflections on what moving to a better healthcare system might look like and what lessons we've learned from the pandemic. So as you know, COVID was really an epic stress test for our healthcare system. About more than a year ago, when the pandemic was first hitting, we were laying off people everywhere, including incredibly valuable nurses and physicians and others. And we saw a significant impact on the operating margins of our hospitals and healthcare systems, down to about 0.5% average operating margin, which meant that more than half the systems were actually negative. And it was only because of the CARES Act that cash flow in many of these systems actually stayed afloat. And I have here some numbers in terms of the overall operating margin impact and other details. It does look like it's improved a lot in 2021, but that stress test has really, I think, changed the perspective of many health system leaders. And one of the lessons that we learned during the pandemic was that alternative models of care, business models of care, actually create more resilience. And so one of the topics that I cover in the book is Medicare Advantage programs, where groups of doctors like those at ChenMed, Iora Health, Oak Street, take on the full financial risk for their patients. In other words, they're paid by Medicare a fixed amount of money every year to care for any given patient. And then if they're able to keep those patients healthy and out of the hospital and spend less than Medicare has given them, then they get to pocket that. But if the patient ends up going into the hospital, into the ER multiple times and spends too much money, then they actually lose those dollars. So it's a full risk business model. And actually, during the pandemic, these folks actually did much better than most other programs, because in the fee-for-service models of Medicare, once the services stopped happening in the pandemic, they stopped getting any fees. Whereas for these folks, they actually were much more resilient because they got a monthly paycheck from Medicare to care for those patients. And as a result, they were able to use those dollars to invest in, for example, urgent medical center or urgent care centers, converting their clinics into urgent care centers when their patients were afraid to go into the ER, or delivering their medications at home, for example. So long and short of it is, we're seeing much more willingness on the part of provider systems to think about different payment models, including global payment models, which I thought would take much longer, but which COVID has really accelerated. And actually, this theme of what Chris Chen calls a subscription-based payment model as opposed to a pay-as-you-go model also advantaged other systems like the military health system and the VA health system as well. So thinking about that and the fact that these systems have come out of a very rough year with very slim margins, many of them are thinking a lot more about how they can get their businesses back in order, and in particular focused on their margins and cost reduction. And so I just want to spend 1 minute talking a little bit about that cost reduction piece, to say that there's a lot of focus in the tech side on how to support hospitals in driving quality, improving experience, and especially reducing the costs of care. Some of the work that we did at the University of Utah actually informs what I'm about to say, which is that in much of the healthcare delivery system, we actually don't really know that much about what it actually costs us to deliver our care. So not what we're going to bill or charge necessarily, but what it actually costs us to run our businesses. And I spent a fair amount of time in the book talking a little bit about this, because I think it's very important in order to manage our costs more effectively, to actually know our costs. So one of the things we did a few years back was to work out the costs of care for every patient who came into our hospital, whether they were having a baby or getting a new hip or having their heart operated upon, and actually worked out what it cost us to deliver those services. Here's an example of how we costed out for a patient who say came in for an appendectomy, how much it cost when they were in the emergency room, in the operating room, in the ICU, and so on. And when we worked out these costs, what we discovered was there was a lot of variation. So here's a chart that shows how much it cost us to do a hip replacement or a knee replacement across our 10 or so different orthopedic surgeons. And you could see there's a lot of variation. Now imagine this horizontal line here being the amount that Medicare pays us for that hip replacement. And of course, the doctors who are below that line, we are making some profit off of. The doctors who are above the line, we're actually losing a lot of money. So having these tools really enabled us to identify opportunities to reduce our cost of care. It also helped us compare various technologies as well as even new medications in order to evaluate their cost effectiveness, to look to see how much, for example, a new medical device might be impacting the overall outcomes of a given patient. And I'm going to say that this is going to be increasingly important as health systems are taking financial risk for care of patients. They're going to be much more attentive to whether these devices and medications are actually improving outcomes. At the end of the day, for every health system that's able to reduce their cost of care, especially on the inpatient side, many of those savings can fall directly to their bottom line. And that was our experience when I was at the University of Utah. What I'm showing you here is operating margin. And in gray, the national average operating margin during the time when I was the CEO there was maybe 2 to 3%. I was fortunate to inherit a system that had about a 4% operating margin, but through some of these careful cost management and quality management programs, we were able to more than double our system margin, all while staying in the top 10 among all university health systems on Vizient, or University Health System Consortium, or now Vizient. So these kind of capabilities are also ones that we have built in Verily. Verily Value Suite is a very similar set of tools for hospitals, physicians, and their patients in order to drive value. So that's a little bit about health systems, and I'm going to spend a little time now shifting to what we're seeing on the patient side. And this is a little closer now to the work that we're doing in Verily with respect to digital health. And it starts really with this observation that, and many of you, I'm sure, saw this news early in the COVID pandemic, that so many of the people who were the most susceptible to getting really sick with COVID, in fact, getting hospitalized, and even those who were dying of COVID, were those who had underlying chronic conditions like diabetes, like hypertension, like obesity. And these were the very patients who needed care during the pandemic, were also the most afraid to come into our emergency rooms, completely understandably. And so, not surprisingly, during that time, we really saw telehealth come of age, really take off. Every single health system saw utilization just skyrocket during the early mid to 2020s. Although it's settling down a little bit now, we saw significant change in culture and acceptability of telehealth for both doctors and patients. And so this really feeds very strongly into these advances in thinking about how patients overall can use telehealth and can use digital technologies to really engage more effectively in their health in general, recognizing that most of health doesn't happen in the hospitals and clinics. We really saw that when the hospitals and clinics were occupied with COVID, everyone else had to kind of figure it out on their own. And by having some of these technologies, we're really able to manage much better than most people thought. And so that's really led to a complete explosion in the digital health space. These are some very familiar logos, I'm sure, to many of you. If we were in person and if I could see you, I would be asking for a show of hands to say, how many of you have actually tried a digital health solution? Have tried, say, maybe a mindfulness app? Because if you haven't, I encourage you to do so. I think we're really in the infancy of this development. When I speak with medical students and residents and do grand rounds all over the country, I tell them, you all will be prescribing these digital health solutions. So get used to it and start to develop an appreciation for them. So what I thought I'd do is just take you quickly through 3 case studies of digital health solutions, just to give you a sense of, from my vantage point, of what they're bringing to the clinical landscape that's so exciting. The first one is called Pivot. The company is Carrot, and this Pivot product is a smoking cessation digital tool. It's actually the business of a colleague of mine from medical school. He actually became a head and neck surgeon and was operating out on the West Coast, I think at Stanford, and was just getting so fed up as a head and neck surgeon. He had to perform really difficult and often devastating operations on people who had cancers that were mostly attributable to tobacco use. And so he just said, okay, I'm so fed up with this. I wanted to get more people to stop smoking. So this is his business. And what you see here is a black device down here in the right corner. And it's a small little device that is a carbon monoxide detector. So you blow into it and it measures the carbon monoxide in your breath. And then you see on the screen, if you've been smoking, you'll have high carbon monoxide. That'll go into the red. If you haven't done so much, you'll be in the green. And there's a little Bluetooth chip, so it transmits it over to the app. And then on the app, you can, of course, trace your carbon monoxide record. And but also there's this whole behavioral interventional program, various challenges, various nudges. Let's say, can we go 6 hours without smoking, or can we go 4 hours without smoking, 6 hours? Can we go a whole day without smoking? You can imagine how that works. And he's been very diligent in collecting data to show how effective this program is. So that's one example. The next example is a product that is from our portfolio. So this is one of our health platform products on Duo. This product started in the diabetes space, helping people with diabetes manage their blood sugars. And now, of course, has expanded to include high blood pressure, weight loss, depression, other conditions. But I'm going to just show you how the diabetes part of it works. In the upper right-hand corner, the gray device is a Dexcom continuous glucose monitor. Verily happens to have helped develop that device, actually. Anyway, so that device goes on your arm or abdomen. And now, instead of having to, prick your finger multiple times a day and get a drop of blood in order to check your blood sugar, that little device instead measures your blood sugar continuously 24/7 for up to, say, a couple of weeks. Again, it has a Bluetooth chip, sends it over to your phone, and you can see on this screenshot the little tracing in the bottom. And that is just mapping out an individual's blood sugar. And there's a little gray bar that says what the desired range is. And you probably don't need any AI to know that the picture of that breakfast muffin probably wasn't the best choice for that individual. But for the first time now, because people can take pictures of their meals and snacks, they can make that their own visual association between what they're eating, how they're sleeping, how they're exercising, and what it's doing to their blood sugars. And you can imagine it's completely transformative for most patients. But there is some AI layered on top when it's not so obvious. So, one of my favorite examples is some people do better with soy milk in their coffee. Other people do better with skim milk, for example. And so it can make recommendations. And then, of course, you can video chat with a coach or with a physician or do texting and so on. And it has, again, all the behavioral change, all the challenges, all the encouragement. And our product, like others also out in the market, all of the products in this field have really consistently shown that people with diabetes do very, very well in these programs. The third example is Thrive. This is Arianna Huffington's program. This has also been picked up by a number of large employers like Walmart. Here, instead of a sensor device, the actual input is what people put in on their phone. This is much more about wellness and mindfulness and personal goals, and uses a lot more of the social connections between people to nudge them, to kind of encourage people, a lot of sharing of stories, and encouraging people to take micro steps towards the goals that they establish for themselves. So what you see across this landscape of these digital health solutions is, I just sort of reduced it into this simple theme of collect, organize, and activate. Because I think it's an easier way for me to think about it. Collecting data, collecting information. Sometimes it's existing information, sometimes it's novel sources of information, like the carbon monoxide level in your blood. And then it's organizing it all. It's sort of figuring out, okay, what is that combination of how you slept, how you exercised, and what you ate? And what did that impact? What kind of impact did that have on your blood sugars? And then most importantly, how do we activate people? This is that whole behavior change side, and recognizing that what activates you may be different from what activates the person next to you. Maybe you're influenced by what your spouse tells you to do, or your partner, and somebody else wants to hear what experts say, and somebody else wants to hear what their doctor says. And so we can kind of activate people depending on their personalities and what motivates them. So lots of work in this space. Happy to talk about this more in the Q&A, but huge opportunities now, especially in the post-COVID landscape, with an increasing appreciation for how critical these programs are for keeping people healthy outside of the hospital and clinics. I'm just going to finish with a really quick note about payers, because I think often, at least from the landscape of as a practicing physician, I think we often think about the interaction between patients and physicians or other clinicians a lot. But of course, the payers, and especially want to talk about employers, kind of often the hidden payers, are absolutely critical. And one of the favorite chapters that I have in my book is the chapter that is really about employers. Because employers, as you know, actually pay for healthcare for about half of all Americans. And so in my view, they're our most important customers. Most of us are selling goods and services and products in the healthcare arena, and we have to recognize that at the end of the day, these employers are paying for the healthcare of half of all Americans. So we should be really attuned to what they're thinking and to the role that they can play. And ordinarily, I read a section from my book at this point, but I think right now, in the interest of time, I won't. I'll just give you a sense of the story that I try to tell in this section of the long fix, which is about employers, and it's about a physician, Bob Mecklenburg, at Virginia Mason Medical Center, who meets one day the representative of 4 major employers in Seattle, which is where they are. Starbucks, Costco, Nordstrom, and King County. And these employers basically come to him and say, look, Virginia Mason's just got way too expensive for us. We're going to drop you from our plan. And I tell the story about how he comes to understand why they're so expensive, how he comes to work with those employers to figure out how to deliver more consistent and low cost, high quality care, and how actually they begin to think about healthcare as like a supply chain issue and start to offer recommendations for how Virginia Mason can deliver more consistent service like Starbucks, and maybe a better patient experience like Nordstrom, and maybe more efficient care like Costco. So kind of a lot of the lessons that the business itself can learn from them. I think it's a really interesting story. And so there's some lessons from there about how employers really, when they get engaged, can really impact the health of their employees, and it can actually negotiate very effectively on behalf of their employees for better health care. During COVID, we've seen so much more engagement on the part of employers, and I think that's really important because we've seen that one of the concerns that we have is that preventative care and primary care have really dropped off in the last year. And so a lot of people have missed their mammograms and missed their cholesterol checks. And so it's a really important time for people to get more engaged. And we're really optimistic because we have at Verily been working with so many employers, keeping their employees safe through COVID. So we have a large business called Healthy at Work, which is supporting employers all across the country, as well as universities. We have employers that have, 4,000 retail branches, and we have covered all of the universities in the state of Alabama, for example, just to support them through COVID, whether it's symptom checking, vaccine card uploading, testing, all kinds of testing, and so on. And what we've seen is, first of all, employers that really manage their employees in a really engaged way have been able to totally successfully manage through COVID. And now they're really, really interested in kind of getting caught up on that preventative care because they definitely don't want their employees getting sick or having diseases progress that could have been prevented earlier. So we're working with them very closely, and there's just a lot of work to be done in this post-pandemic world. But I think it's if there is any silver lining at all, it's that everybody is a lot more engaged in their health, and I think that's a really, really good thing. So with that, gone through a little bit of a whirlwind through some perspectives of the post-COVID world for patients and clinicians and payers, and now I'm happy to maybe go off screen share and happy to have a little bit of Q&A in the remaining 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Excellent presentation. But we do want to get a robust question and answer session going here. So if I could get somebody, I don't know if Jason, if you're around and can man the microphone. If I've lost him, do I have a volunteer maybe at this table that'll be the Oprah Winfrey? There you go. Well, maybe I should have used a male. But anyway, thank you, Karthik. Much appreciated. Okay, so I will ask the first question, but oh no, Andy's got the first question. Did I see a hand? No, not yet. Okay, so my question would be for Dr. Lee. Having transitioned from clinical medicine to healthcare administration and then to a innovation company like Verily, you've got to have a unique view on innovation, but that is a theme that's carried you through all the different transitions. So What differences did you see in innovation and disruptive technology in each of those sectors?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, the main difference that I see is in the pace of innovation. So, I think there's innovation in all three of those environments, but the pace of change in the tech sector is just, or certainly, at least, let me say, not across the entire sector. I can't speak for the whole sector, but in my own experience is just remarkable. When I joined Verily 3.5 years ago, Health Platforms was a startup. So I founded Health Platforms within Verily. And today we have 5 businesses and a joint venture. One of those businesses, we have a stop loss insurance company, we have Onduo, we have a COVID business, Healthy at Work, for example. We have an opioid substance use disorder program. I mean, that could not have been possible, I think, in any other venue where I've worked. What's similar across all of them is that the innovation really happens at the intersection of people who come from very different backgrounds and perspectives. And so what's so, for example, in the group that, we now have maybe about 250, 300 employees in Health Platforms. And the group includes, of course, many of our employees come from Google. So many of our engineers, product managers, user experience people have come from, say, leading user experience at Google News or leading engineering at Google Cloud or leading. So that's really interesting. And then we have all kinds of people who come from healthcare. And then we have a lot of people who come from other, one of my lead user experience people most recently came from Roomba, the vacuum thing, the robotic, all kinds of backgrounds. And it's that diversity of perspectives and expertise and backgrounds that I think is the richest source of innovation. And I believe that that's the case everywhere that I've been.
Any questions from the audience yet? I got more. Okay, we'll move on to my next question while you get brave. Do we have someone? Okay, thank you.
It's about 15 years ago, but I'm just wondering how accurate are the comparable healthcare costs on a procedural basis now?
Maybe you could just repeat that once? I kind of clicked out.
My most recent healthcare costing experience is about 15 years old, but I'm just wondering how accurate and comparable are to the reported figures today by procedure.
How accurate are the costing figures today? Great question. So, well, first of all, I'll say that the costing data are not available in most health systems. So you can't even ask how accurate they are for most health systems, because most health systems have not costed out healthcare to each episode of care, to each patient's visit or hospitalization. They have, say, the overall cost of labor, the overall cost of pharmacy, but not attributed to each patient clinician encounter, if you know what I mean. But where the systems that have done it, I think it's pretty accurate. We actually did a study where we compared a couple of different approaches to doing cost accounting and found that it was maybe 5 to 10% difference, which anything in healthcare that's within that 5 to 10% range, I think is pretty accurate, given where we are today.
Okay, another question. I know Verily acquired SignalPath. I don't know if that happened while you were there, but could you speak to that acquisition and provide any advice you have in terms of companies that would like to get acquired, perhaps not necessarily by Verily, but by any company?
Sure. So SignalPath, Verily acquired SignalPath this summer, and that was a part of our clinical studies platform. So in Verily, we have health platform and we have clinical study platform or baseline. And that acquisition was conducted just shortly after Amy Abernathy joined us to lead the clinical studies platform. I'm sure many of you know Amy. She's really phenomenal, most recently from the FDA, before that Flatiron and Duke. And so the signal path acquisition was really critical because that, first of all, it's an incredibly talented group of people who were very well known to Amy and to the clinical studies platform folks. And they offer very complementary capabilities, which were very important for us at Verily, particularly in supporting clinical research sites and the ability to recruit patients effectively at those sites with their tools, really high quality tools and a really high quality organization. So we found them particularly valuable because of that complementarity.
I knew you had a question, Andy.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, is it on? There's a lot of talk about the pharmaceutical industry as the bad people in healthcare reform. It's about 17% of the total expenses is through pharmaceuticals. If you look at the top 25 hospital systems in the United States, their net revenue is anywhere from $1 billion to $5.3 billion. A couple of the hospitals that you worked at are making an enormous amount of money. And how do we change the healthcare system when these hospitals are raking in so much money? I'm just sort of curious what your remedy is from the book here.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing in the hospital industry, or we're seeing just generally across both hospitals, payers, and providers, is rather than focusing on how we can deliver better health outcomes at lower costs, there's a lot more attention strategically focused on market power and consolidation. And of course, as you know, the monopolies do pretty well. And so the more consolidation you have, the stronger position you have in any given market. And I think we're seeing that play out in many of our larger urban markets in healthcare. I think pharmaceutical companies, we wouldn't have, look at what the vaccine has done for us. I think the appreciation for the scientific developments and the translation of science into, in the case of vaccine, I was going to say cures, but in the case of vaccine, prevention and cures is nothing short of miraculous. I think there's no question about that. And the challenge I think that we have is, particularly in this country, is how do we ensure that the people who need those medications are able to access and afford them? I think that's one. And I think that one of the most pressing questions that we have to face is, as we get better and better at precision medicine, the really specialized gene therapies that really only benefit, relatively speaking, a handful of patients. I mean, of course, it could be thousands, but it's still a small number of patients. But of course, they cost a lot of money to develop, and they cost money. How do we figure out what is going to be the business model for that? Because of course, we want to take advantage of all of this incredible technology. We want to take advantage of gene therapies and be able to cure rare diseases. But I think our business model is going to be really challenged, because I'm not sure that we can afford $1 million treatment for every, rare disease that we have out there. I don't think that's really going to be sustainable for our health system. So I think that those are some of the questions that I see on our horizon.
Got a follow-up?
Thank you for that. The bigger question is, if we're trying to get better health for more Americans and increase our life, and we look at the amount of money that we're spending, it strikes me, and from the reports I've read, the hospitals are pulling in the majority of the money. If you look at your bill, anybody just goes to the hospital for the ER, you look at the cost, the medications are very low. It's all of the billing that takes place at the hospital. And what are hospitals doing to control these costs?
Yeah, so the average margin for hospitals is around 2 to 3% for nonprofits. So of course there are in any curve, you have the extremes of people who are, 2 or 3 standard deviations above average, but the average hospital last year had a margin of 0.5%. I do believe that a significant amount of money that is going into hospitals is wasted. I think the bureaucratic, the administrative, what I call the $1 trillion tug of war between hospitals and insurance companies that takes place every year. Bill, code, deny, prior auth, whatever, kind of that tug of war is wasting a lot of money. There's no question about that. But if you look at if you look at the report, you look at Moody's, you look at any of the reports, the average margin is not that high across health systems. And I think that right now, I think there's a real tension between trying to really double down and focus on, okay, how do we reduce our costs? Like I tried to show, if you can't really reduce your costs if you don't know your costs. Most hospitals don't know their costs at the individual episode of care, delivery of care. So I think that's absolutely necessary. And it's much more tempting to just consolidate, like, oh, let's just team up and buy up some more hospitals and approach it in that way. So I think that is a big challenge. On the other hand, I also think that for the pharmaceutical industry, I think that proving cost effectiveness in the pharmaceutical industry is also a challenge and something that the industry should be held accountable to as well. I think everybody needs to be held accountable. The healthcare system is so broken, but it's no one entity's fault. It's everybody. I think we're all responsible. That's my view of it. So we all have a role to play.
And the book even talks about the consumer having responsibility for pricing out what their care is and asking for information. So that's
I talk about it as on the consumer role. It's a little bit like I have this surf and turf metaphor it's like when you go out to dinner with a whole bunch of friends and at the end of the night you're going to share the bill and you look at the menu like, oh, I could get the chicken Caesar salad, or I could just get the surf and turf. And well, rinse with the bill. And what do you know? At the end of the night, everybody's gotten the surf and turf. And healthcare is a little bit like that in the US. We think we're covered by our insurance if we're, through our employer. And we, so sometimes, and when we go into the doctor, we always want to come out with a prescription or with a referral, or, we want to get our money's worth. And then at the end of the day, we as consumers or as patients are also driving those costs up as well. We all have a role to play.
So what about artificial intelligence in the healthcare system? Any thoughts regarding potential for implicit bias built into the databases?
Well, artificial intelligence, I think, it's just a tool. It's like anything else. It can be used for good and for not. There's an enormous amount of opportunity for AI, as many people are much more expert than I can tell you, whether it's drug discovery all the way to image recognition and automatically interpreting pathology slides or imaging slides or images, or recognizing, for example, meals and snacks in our photos for people with diabetes. There's just so much opportunity around AI, but as you point out, Tina, this is one of the things we really have to be very mindful of, is that the way in which we're using AI is going to be as unbiased as possible. So for us, it's been very important that we include in our pilot studies, as we're developing our products, as we're doing user focus groups, we really try to include people who really are representative of the consumers that we're aiming to serve with our products, so that the algorithms that we build are reflective of them. And so that's one area in which we've really focused a lot on.
Any additional questions from the audience?
I might have to drop. I think I had until about 1:30, so hopefully that if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have one more, and it's this. I would be remiss if I didn't note that you had some medical training at Duke University, well here within the Southeast. And so I want to ask you if you can speak to any opportunities or challenges you see for the Southeast Life Sciences community.
Well, actually, we have a number of partnerships with folks in the Southeast. So I'm not sure if I can speak to any particular challenges, except to say that I think there are enormous opportunities given the from our perspective, just given the demographics of the Southeast, you have a lot of talent. This is something that one of the reasons why we've been setting up campuses and wanting to work with partners there. There are a lot of organizations that have a lot of talent there. You're aware of that. I'm sure you're recruiting from those same pools. And then you have a very interesting set of demographics. You have a population that's very reflective of people of all kinds of backgrounds. You have the urban-rural challenges. You have lots of, you're kind of a microcosm of the broader country. So from a technology perspective, maybe speaking to your last question, the organizations and communities and patients that are people who live in the Southeast are actually very attractive for folks like us to partner with.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lee. I really did enjoy your book. I got it on Audible, listened to it, and then I bought a hard copy. I'm going to send you one, Andy. All right. So thanks to everyone. I'm going to turn it over back with some trepidation back to Jason. But it's been a pleasure, Dr. Lee. Appreciate all your insights, and thanks for staying through the lunch.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the meeting, everyone.
I want to thank everybody, and on behalf of the board of directors, thank you for attending this year. Ken Eman and Jane Morgan, who have been the chairs this last year, who are rotating off. On behalf of them, I'd like to thank you all. I would like to invite Scott McCarty up to say a few things. Scott is incoming chair with Lee Burns from Avanos, and we will see you. So our next conference, we have a quick turnaround, is May 25th through the 27th in Atlanta. So we'll be following up, starting actually some of that next week, in fact. So Scott.
All right, guys, well, we almost made it. Thanks so much. It was a great couple days of content, and thanks to all the speakers, Dr. Lee especially, Kim at Mammoth, and even the investor panel for beating up our SVB data yesterday. So it was a lot of fun. And like Jason said, we kind of go right back into conference planning mode here, and so we look forward to seeing everybody at Avalon in Atlanta in May. Thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it.